Come, baby.
Enjoy this great game.
Welcome to another edition of MLB Hall of Fame Snubs, and today we'll be ranking number 30 through number 21. But before getting into that list, there have been some updates to my top 10 list. In the recent 2023 Hall of Fame election, my number 6 snub of all time was finally elected to the Hall of Fame, and it is Scott Rolen, who was an elite player on both sides of the ball. Rolen was a Rookie of the Year winner who ended his career with 8 Gold Gloves. Based on the defense alone, he would have been a Hall of Fame candidate, but when you take into account his amazing bat and the fact that he averaged 28 home runs a year for 8 straight seasons and drove in 100 runs 5 times, it's a shoo-in for me, and Scott Rolen absolutely deserves enshrinement in Cooperstown, and I'm very happy to remove him from my snubs list as he gets the plaque he deserves. And the second update, of course, is my number 1 snub of all time, the crime dog, Fred McGriff, who was elected by the Contemporary Era Committee after somehow being snubbed on the ballot for 15 years. In my opinion, the fact that this happened will be a black eye for the Writers Association for as long as they continue to be the sole voters on the traditional Hall of Fame ballot. Fred McGriff, of course, came within 7 home runs of 500. And had he hit those measly 7 more homers, he would have probably been in a long time ago. McGriff was an elite hitter, an excellent defender for over a decade, averaging 30 home runs a year for an astonishing 16 years. Congratulations to both Fred McGriff and Scott Rolen for being elected into the Hall of Fame. Better late than never. But to replace McGriff and Rolen in the top 10, I'm going to start with a brand new snub, and that snub is Carlos Beltran, who made the Hall of Fame ballot this year and received only 46.5% of the vote. Beltran was similar to Rolen in that he was a Rookie of the Year winner who was an elite defender and hitter, but Beltran played for even longer, accumulating 435 home runs and 2,725 hits. He was a 9-time All-Star, 3-time Gold Glover, 2-time Silver Slugger, and drove in over 100 runs 8 times. It is certainly worth pointing out that Beltran lost many votes due to his involvement in the 2017 Houston Astros cheating scandal. He was a 40-year-old player at the time in the last year of his career, so whatever cheating took place certainly did not change the fact that he had a Hall of Fame career. So will the voters seriously keep him out for this? He not only had a Hall of Fame career, but also won the Roberto Clemente Award in 2013 for his humanitarian work off the field. He apologized for his involvement, took responsibility, and you have Astros manager A.J. Hinch and bench coach Alex Cora still continuing their managerial careers elsewhere without issue. And as a final point, sign stealing has been a part of the game forever, and even though the Astros clearly took it too far, Beltran was far from the only one involved, and to keep him out of the Hall of Fame for this one blemish on his otherwise stellar resume, in my opinion, is ridiculous. Carlos Beltran is my newest top 10 Hall of Fame snub of all time, along with a player from the 19th century named Ross Barnes, who not only hit the first home run in MLB history, but absolutely dominated the game during the early years of professional baseball. For more info on Barnes, check out my video on him, which I will link above as well as at the end of this video, and those 2 players will replace McGriff and Rolen in my top 10. So now that my top 10 remains complete, let's move on to 10 more snubs, number 30 through 21. And keep in mind, most of these snubs could be considered borderline cases, but in my opinion, all 10 deserve to be enshrined, and I'll explain why. So let's go. Starting with number 30, David Cone. Although most baseball fans remember David Cone as being a really good pitcher, his name may not jump out as an obvious Hall of Famer, but when digging a little bit deeper, I believe he has an excellent case. He had a 17-year career that included 5 All-Star appearances, 5 World Series rings, and even a Cy Young Award in 1992. Cone is 27th all-time in career strikeouts with 2,668. His career WAR of 26.3 beats out many Hall of Fame starters, including Don Drysdale and Whitey Ford. When examining his placement on the JAWS ranking, which evaluates Hall of Fame worthiness, Cone finds himself dropped in the middle of a massive list of Hall of Famers. Notice how Cone's name is mixed in with names like Juan Marichal, Bob Feller, and others. He only had 194 career wins, but when considering everything else, does that warrant him falling off the ballot during his first year of eligibility? Without the Cy Young, maybe he's a borderline case, but when you add that into the mix, it puts it over the top for me. David Cone should have a plaque. Number 29, Jack Glasscock. He was the best shortstop of an entire century, albeit the 19th century. Called the king of shortstops, dead ball superstar Jack Glasscock had a 17-year career in which he collected over 2,000 hits. At that time, 2,000 hits was no small feat, as he was only the 6th player of all time to do it. However, his strongest asset was his defense. Glasscock led the National League in fielding percentage 7 times and assists 6 times. When he retired in 1895, he had the major league record for games played, putouts, assists, double plays, and fielding percentage. Had the Hall of Fame existed at that time, he would have been a first ballot no-brainer Hall of Famer. Unfortunately, by the time the Hall of Fame did exist, he was overshadowed by the greats of the 20th century and received only 2.6% of the vote in his one and only year on the ballot. Since then, he's only been forgotten even more, due largely to the fact that he played mostly for teams that no longer exist, like the Indianapolis Hoosiers or the Louisville Colonels. He did, however, play 2 years for the New York Giants, including the outstanding 1890 season, in which he led the league in hits and won a batting title with a .336 average. Despite the fact that his overall numbers may not be Hall of Fame worthy by today's standards, because he stood out above his peers as one of the best in the game for well over a decade, even if it was in the 19th century, Jack Glasscock deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Number 28, Louis Tiant. Coming up next is Louis Tiant, a pitcher who was on the ballot for 15 years and was never elected. He was also snubbed on 3 ballots for the Veterans Committee. Today he is 82 years old and still with us, so I'm hopeful that he will be able to enjoy the moment when he is elected. Let's get it done. This is a guy who had a 19-year career in which he won at least 20 games 4 times, finished in the top 6 for the Cy Young 3 times, and had 2 ERA titles. He had 2,416 strikeouts, more than Sandy Koufax, Juan Marichal, and Jim Palmer. The postseason, Tiant was 3-0 with a 2.86 ERA in 4 starts. He had all of these accomplishments despite playing a large portion of his career at the hitter-friendly Fenway Park. He also pitched for the offensively light Cleveland Indians for the first 6 years of his career, and the lack of run support hurt his record. For example, he went 12-11 in 1966 despite a 2.79 ERA. 5 of his 12 wins that year were via the shutout. And in 1968, he went 21-6 with an ERA of 1.6. Unfortunately, he only made 3 All-Star teams, but was certainly snubbed there as well. In 1973, for instance, he won 20 games and had 12 at the All-Star break, but did not make the All-Star team. All told, Tiant won 229 games with a 3.3 ERA and an incredibly impressive 187 complete games. He is also one of 2 pitchers with 2 streaks of 40-plus scoreless innings. The other, Walter Johnson. Number 27, Tommy John. How could a player who had a Hall of Fame career, who also has one of the most famous names in baseball history, be left on the outside looking in? Even if we ignore the massive impact Tommy John had on the game by becoming the first player to make a successful comeback to the game after successful ligament replacement surgery, his career itself warrants induction. John pitched for an incredibly impressive 26 years. Aside from his incredible longevity, he won 288 career games, 12 shy of 300, and won at least 20 games in 3 separate seasons. Although he never won a Cy Young Award, he certainly could have, as he finished in the top 10 4 times, which includes twice as the runner-up. The only reason I have Tommy John ranked this low on my overall list of snubs is because he was only great for about a 4-year window, and for most of his career, he was good. Still, I consider longevity an important factor, and considering he pitched for 26 years, his 3.34 ERA is quite impressive. When you combine his career numbers with the fact that he did make an extraordinary comeback through a groundbreaking surgery that bears his name and continues to help hundreds of pitchers continue their careers despite experiencing what used to be career-ending injuries, it is a shame that Tommy John isn't in the Hall of Fame. Perhaps it shouldn't be a surprise, as the player with the most hits is not in, the player with the most home runs is not in, and the player with the most famous name of all is not in. Number 26, Orel Hershiser. Up next is a player whose shelves are filled with so many awards that if you visited his home, you would just assume he must be a Hall of Famer. His name is Orel Hershiser, and just to run through those awards before getting into his stats, he has a Cy Young, an MLB Player of the Year award, a Silver Slugger, an ALCS MVP, an NLCS MVP, a World Series MVP, and a Gold Glove award, and add to all that a World Series ring and 3 All-Star appearances. He was one of, if not the best pitcher in the game during the late 80s. At one point in 1988, he threw a record 59 consecutive scoreless innings. Although his career certainly slowed down after the 80s, he continued to be a dominant postseason pitcher and pitched well for both the Indians and the Mets, and retired with an ERA of 2.59 in 22 postseason games. Although his best regular season years were certainly with the Dodgers, especially that insane 1988 Cy Young season, in which he went 23-8 with a 2.26 ERA, he was still good later in his career. For example, from 1995 to 1997 with Cleveland, he went 45-21. His accomplishments and awards alone merit induction, despite only winning 204 career games, which is partially due to poor run support. He did have a relatively high ERA at 3.48, but it's been proven that you can get in with an ERA in the threes. Jack Morris was recently inducted, and he has a 3.9 career ERA. Bottom line, when you do what Hershiser did at his best, then go on to win 200 games plus while continuing to pitch well when it counts, you deserve a plaque, in my opinion. Number 25, Albert Belle. Next up, we have a player known more for his insane temper and toxic relationship with the media than his talent on the field, and this is unfortunately what may have kept him out of Cooperstown. After all, it's the baseball writers who vote. Albert Belle got only 7% of the vote on his first year on the ballot. The next year, he dropped to around 3%, falling off the ballot. Only played for 12 years, but was an absolute machine during most of it, driving in over 100 runs 9 consecutive times. That includes the strike short in 1994 when he smashed 36 homers in just 101 games. Bell finished in the top 3 for MVP 3 times, in the top 10 5 times, and although he never won the award he should have in 1995 when he crushed 50 home runs with 126 RBIs. He had a slugging percentage of .690, an OPS over 1,000, and led his team to an easy division crown. He also hit .317 that year, but lost the MVP to Mo Vaughn, who hit .300 with 39 home runs. Bell was better in nearly every category, but Vaughn took home the MVP. Bell did win the Player of the Year award, and in his career, he was a 5-time All-Star, 5-time Silver Slugger, and the only player to ever hit 50 home runs and 50 doubles in the same season. Fortunately, he had to retire early due to a bad back, but he still managed 381 home runs, over 1,200 RBIs, a .295 batting average, and his career OPS of .933 is just 7 points below one Willie Mays, and is better than Hank Aaron, Albert Pujols, and Ken Griffey Jr., among many other greats. To me, the only possible excuse to keep him out is his lack of longevity, but when you're as good as he was, 12 years is more than enough. Number 24, Carlos Delgado. Next up on my list of Hall of Fame snubs is the great Carlos Delgado, who is slightly higher than Bell because he had a longer career at 17 years, which allowed him to hit 473 home runs, just 27 shy of 500. Aside from that, he also had a season where he could have easily taken home the MVP. It was 2003, when Delgado hit 42 home runs with an incredible 145 RBIs, while hitting .302 with an OPS over 1,000. A-Rod, perhaps with a little assistance, outdid him in Texas and won the MVP. Since voters don't consider juicers legit and won't put them in the Hall, I assume they must also credit Delgado for being the true MVP that year. Aside from 2003, he was also incredibly consistent, crushing at least 30 home runs 11 times and over 40 3 times. Here's one stat that might convince you Delgado is a Hall of Famer, or at least deserved more than getting kicked off the ballot after 1 year. He drove in more runs than Mickey Mantle. When you combine that fact with the fact that he had nearly 500 home runs, that's all I need to know. Names on the list of similar players on Baseball Reference include Willie McCovey, Jeff Bagwell, and Willie Stargell. The voters did Delgado dirty when they failed to give him even 5% of the vote. Number 23, Thurman Munson. Up next is a player whose career and life was cut short by a tragic plane crash. And had that never occurred, Munson would have likely waltzed into the Hall of Fame. Still, even with his shortened career, I believe Munson deserves enshrinement. During his 11-year career, he made 7 All-Star teams, won 3 Gold Gloves, and took home the Rookie of the Year award as well as an MVP. That itself sounds close to a Hall of Famer, and if it's not enough, how about an absolutely phenomenal postseason career in which he hit .357 in 30 games, helping the Yankees win 2 World Series rings. He had 16 World Series starts and was unstoppable, hitting .373, and he was also dominant defensively, throwing out 4 of 6 would-be base stealers during the 1977 World Series. The only excuse to keep him out is his shortened career, in which he still hit .292 but only had 1,558 hits. Still, he did get the 10-year minimum in it. He has an MVP. He was an absolute superstar, and when you add that to his postseason contributions, I believe he absolutely deserves a plaque, and I am shocked that he was never voted in when you consider his tragic death, for better or worse, would have gotten him some sympathy votes. Nevertheless, in my opinion, sympathy votes or not, he is a Hall of Famer. Number 22, Jim McCormick. Once again, it's time to go way back in time and talk about one of the early players of the game, Jim McCormick, another forgotten 19th century player who played pro ball from 1878 to 1887. Just 10 years, but during that time his numbers were off the charts even for early baseball stats. For example, he won 265 games in just 10 years. In 1880, he led the league with an insane, even at the time, 45 wins, a number impossible to achieve today. He is 11th all-time with 466 complete games and is one of just 4 pitchers in baseball history with 4,000 innings pitched and an ERA under 2.5. The other 3 are in the Hall of Fame: Christy Mathewson, Walter Johnson, and Eddie Plank. In fact, when looking at his incredible numbers, it's quite baffling he's not in. And the reason may be because he hasn't been on the ballot for many decades, and when he was held out at that time for not reaching 300 wins, a number that most of his peers who made the Hall of Fame did. However, nowadays 300 wins is rare and far from a requirement to get in. Jim McCormick is someone whose case needs to be reevaluated. He needs to be put in the Hall of Fame, and hopefully he has some descendants who can be there to celebrate the induction. Number 21, Dwight Evans. Coming in as my number 1 ultimate snub in today's edition of More Snubs is an amazing player who spent 20 years in the league, dominating both in the field and at the plate. His name, Dwight Evans. Evans may be the most baffling case of someone who didn't even get 5% of the vote, causing him to fall off the ballot. This just goes to show many of these voters don't do the slightest bit of research when casting their ballot. Dwight Evans played for 20 years. He won 8 Gold Gloves and accumulated over 2,400 hits with 385 home runs. He was a 3-time All-Star, 2-time Silver Slugger, and the offensive numbers alone make him a borderline case. But when you add in the 8 Gold Gloves, to me the case is clear. Dwight Evans belongs in. His career WAR of 67.2 is higher than Willie McCovey, Duke Snider, and Jackie Robinson. Along with his power, Evans had a knack for getting on base and led the league in walks 3 times. He simply helped his teams win games for 20 years on both sides of the ball, and even though he didn't reach any of the big milestone numbers, Evans was great for a sustained period of time and deserves a plaque in Cooperstown. And that does it for the latest edition of MLB Snubs. Please check out the link above if you haven't already watched it. Check out the next 10 after this. And after that, check out the Ultimate Top 10 video as well. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button and thumbs up button to help out the video. I really do appreciate it. Have a fantastic day. Let me know what you think. Who else have I missed? If you've seen all 3 of the videos, maybe I'll find 10 more and have another edition of Snubs. We'll see if I can find 10 more Snubs, and I believe I probably can. Have a fantastic day, everyone, and we'll talk to you next time.